Okay, very warm welcome again. I hope everyone has enough energy after lunch and feeling not too sleepy. My name is Angelina Davydova. I'm an environmental and climate journalist, and I'm also one of the fellows of the Institute for Global Reconstitution. And I have an honor to be moderating the next two panels, which we thought would take a different take. So these two panels will be built up as panel discussions, very short remarks, a lot of questions from our side, from your side. So it will be really more like talks with people who are coming more from the practical side, people who have a lot of experience in the energy sector, in activist sector, in the NGO sector, in research sector, people who know all the questions we talk about throughout this conference from their practical aspects. And so as I mentioned, we have two panels. So the first panel will be talking more about recent changes in the global and European energy agenda, energy and climate agenda, connected with the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 22, but also all further events which happened ever since then. And then the second panel will try to give a broader look on the stakeholders and actors within the energy agenda. Who is taking decisions? What is the role of NGOs? What is the role of researchers? What is the role of activists? And how can all these shareholders, all these stakeholders, all these actors have a bigger impact on the way energy systems are being planned, are being built, and overall our understanding of what energy is and what needs to be done in the world because of all the challenges we have now, from climate crisis to numerous wars and military conflicts. So what needs to be done? Both of the panels will be rather short. We'll have a bit less than an hour in both cases and a coffee break in between. So do prepare your questions, and we are waiting your active participation. So as I mentioned, our first panel, for which we feature two wonderful speakers, Tatiana Mitrova and Oldag Caspar, people who have dozens of years of experience in the energy and climate sector, and they're willing now to share their experience with us and to tell us everything they know. So I'm very happy and I'm very honored to be moderating this panel. So we'll start with giving the first word to Tatiana. And Tatiana, I've known Tatiana for years. So Tatiana, until the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Tatiana was the head of the Skolkovo Institute Energy School in Moscow. But she worked internationally. She also traveled internationally, and she was like very well internationally connected. She was very often telling the international community about everything what was happening in Russia with regard to energy and climate. Now the situation has changed as for many of us, including myself, and now Tatiana is also monitoring what's happening further specifically in Russia, but also further global trends and global processes in the energy sector. And so my first question to Tatiana is, what are the main trends in the global energy sector connected with the beginning of the full-scale war in Ukraine 2.5 years ago? Because of the war, but also following the beginning of the war, right? So we were talking about these two aspects. So please.
Okay, thank you, Angelina, and thanks for this kind introduction. Really glad to be here. I'll try to share my view. I'm not sure that I will cover everything, yeah, but I'll try to. So first of all, I think there are direct consequences, yeah. After the invasion for the global and local energy markets. And there are also indirect. I'll start with the direct ones. The first thing is that you all, I assume, remember this concept of energy trilemma. Yeah, when all the policymakers are trying to balance energy security, environmental performance, and economic affordability of energy. During the past 10 years before the invasion, actually the main focus was on environmental agenda in the OECD world and on the economic affordability in the developing countries. Suddenly, when the war started, the policymakers had to reassess their priorities, and suddenly energy security became so much important. It has led, emergency response in the European Union, but also all over the world, this sentiment that we shouldn't be too much dependent on one single supplier, because look what happened with Europe, especially after the sabotage or whatever it was with Nord Stream. We have to be more advancing our distributed energy sources, because surprise, after 80 peaceful, more or less peaceful years, critical energy infrastructure became subject for direct attacks. Yeah, in Ukraine, yeah, but also like pipelines. Yeah, Norway struggling with some suspicious activity in its offshore zone, and so on and so forth. Lots of cyber attacks. It's not actually that much covered by the media, but I can say from like first-hand knowledge, in February, March 2022, the number of cyber attacks against energy infrastructure, both in Russia and in Europe, so from both sides, it has increased 100 times. So it is serious. Yeah. So what were the consequences for energy transition? Actually, people started to think, okay, if Russia can cut supplies of gas, and it did actually, what if China cuts supplies of critical minerals and electric vehicles and batteries? Yeah, so this whole discussion about over-dependency on China, it became really extremely hot topic. And I can see many discussions ongoing right now. The idea to localize lithium production, for example, like all this Serbian case, yeah. So we shouldn't be too much dependent on these critical resources. What else was interesting? That actually, surprisingly, hydrocarbon markets, their behavior wasn't expected. Yeah, if I was to tell anyone that, look, suddenly Russia will stop gas supplies to European consumers, and EU will impose import ban on Russian oil, Russian petroleum products, and Russian coal, yeah, people would have responded, oh, there will be collapse both in Russia and in Europe. Russian economy would collapse, European energy sector would collapse. It didn't happen. I mean, the bans were imposed, the supplies were cut, nothing dramatic, nothing catastrophic. Yeah, prices went up, but it wasn't as disastrous as people could have expected. So actually, the oil and gas markets, they proved to be extremely resilient and flexible during this shock. Yeah, because it could have been far worse. The victims, as usual, were developing countries, because all these LNG, which came to rescue European market in winter 2022-2023, it was diverted from India, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh. So these countries were left again with coal. Yeah, but European market survived these winters without any major blackout or, disruption of the supplies. Yeah, European industry suffered, but frankly, it started this suffering well before the invasion. Another interesting development was the difference between oil market and gas market. Because in oil market, there coordination, which started back in April 2020, yeah, with COVID demand collapse, yeah, when OPEC Plus actually started to manage supply, yeah, it kept on going, and still we are in this deal of OPEC Plus, which keeps prices, keeps balancing market and keeps sustaining prices amidst very weak global demand. So China is still not recovering, and actually this massive penetration of electric vehicles, we see already how it is undermining the growth of petroleum demand. Yeah. So here, very coordinated actions, they allowed petroleum producers to keep their budget revenues, including Russian budget revenues, which are still on the level higher than they were in 2016 or in 2020, in the most difficult periods of time, despite all the sanctions. With gas market, it is tight. It is still tight despite all the expectations of the next wave of LNG. And frankly, I'm afraid this winter in Europe is not going to be, as relaxed as the previous one. But anyway, the markets, but the free trade, it works more or less. At the same time, sanctions, so something which became the word of the year 2022 and 2023, the number of sanctions imposed on Russia and specifically on its energy sector, it's absolutely incredible, much more than on Iran or Venezuela or you name it, and banning basically everything. And guess what? Nothing. I mean, Russian budget revenues from hydrocarbon exports, they are nearly at the same level as in 2019, or 2021. So they are not great, but they are acceptable. What else happened, and this is already important for the rest of the world, that actually massive market fragmentation started. Russia is no longer trading its oil and gas with Europe, it's selling them to China, to India, to Turkey, to other developing countries with a non-dollar payment. It is important because the share of non-dollar payments is growing around the world. With very untransparent transactions, you just cannot quote the price because it's hidden. And there are many intermediaries and everything is closed, and there are lots of gray operations with this shadow fleet and, transshipping this oil in the middle of the night somewhere in the sea. So the markets are going back from globalization and transparency and liquidity to a very strange, fragmented, bilateral, very complex relationships. Because with India, for example, it's not just Russia selling oil. It's also weapons supplies. It's also oil services supplies from India to Russia. There are grain supplies. So it's much more complex and non-straightforward. It's not just market transaction. Another, indirect consequence, and I am now approaching to the end of the consequences story. It is disappointment among many voters around the world with the policies of their leaders. Right-wing parties winning basically everywhere, as we can see. And these right-wing parties are being extremely skeptical about climate agenda. I mean, listen to Trump, he is probably the best example. Forget about Paris Agreement, we will stop our participation, and so on and so forth. It is all speculative. Word-to-word citation of what Putin is normally saying. So this change of the perception of the leaders, it will be extremely important for the global development and for the green agenda, obviously. At the same time, so this is part driven to a certain extent, to a bigger extent or to the less extent by the war in Ukraine. Another part is something that happened before and it's longer term trend which is not dependent on the war and sometimes even contradicting with both these military logics. First of all, renewables keep growing. 75% of annual investments, energy investments in the world, they are now going into renewable space, and just 25 into hydrocarbons. That's a lot. That's a really big change because it's now driven by economy. Solar panels, they became so cheap that it's really commercially viable. It's much better and interesting investment. At the same time, perception has changed, and now, I mean, before the war, there were lots of discussions like, let's phase out oil and gas. Yeah, International Energy Agency was saying that peak oil will be achieved before 2030, and so on. Now, it's much more cautious. Yeah, they are all reviewing their outlook, saying that, oil and gas will probably remain part of the energy mix for longer. They will go down, obviously, but we cannot phase them out completely in the next decade. Yeah. So this change, people are becoming much more cautious because God knows what will happen with the global energy scene in the next few years. And the question of China's domination in this green space is becoming more and more important in the whole geopolitical discourse. Another very important and new thing which nobody was expecting and which has no relation to Ukraine but which will have a lot of implications for the energy discussion, it's AI. Yeah, so for a decade or so, there was an impression that in the mature economies, energy demand is supposed to plateau. Yeah, so we are becoming more and more energy efficient. The population is not growing, which means our energy demand is not expected to grow as well. And suddenly, humankind has developed this technology which needs a lot of energy. And electricity demand in the US, in Europe, started to grow again, and it needs more energy again. Yeah, and where is this energy coming from? So renewables are not able to provide this stable production all day round, because it's 24/7 actually utilization rate. Yeah, so again, it's about more gas-fired generation, and nuclear came back into the game because all the big tech, they need this stable generation, and nuclear seems to be the best solution for that. So that's something new in the discussion, and this, nuclear renaissance, especially in the US, it's also quite new development. But all in all, the situation for energy looks actually quite gloomy. Yeah, if you are looking as an investor, with money. And if you look at the energy sector, it used to be like 12-15% of S&P 500 index. Now it's 3%. Compared to the big tech guys, it's not appealing. The margins in renewable sector are very low. You better put your money in the bank. Because of these 5-6% internal rate of return, it's not interesting. Permitting process, very long, very strong competition, very low margins. It's not an attractive business. I mean, it's growing, but the margins, they are not that luxury. But with oil and gas in business, it's also similar situation. They are regarding, the companies are now looking at it at like the last big super cycle, because they understand that they will have to, it's no longer growing market, it's stagnating, it's close to peak. So new investments, you are not sure whether you will justify them and get them back. And so the margins are also going, well, they are still good, but they are reducing. But more importantly, investors want their dividends. So everything that you earn as a company, you have to give back to your investors. So again, it's not that luxury and it's not growing. And this is something which is changing the whole perception of the energy sector, which was growing for many decades, which was really the most prestigious place to work, because you were sure that you will have good salary, which was generating very high profits and very high revenues. no longer. You have to share them with your investors because otherwise they will take their money and put them into Googles and Amazons of this world. Yeah, and the whole future of the energy as the driver of the economy is actually questioned now. So two processes in parallel, one like initiated by the war and really supported by it, the other one absolutely independent, which started maybe like 20, 30 years ago, but became visible only now. That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you so much, Tatiana. That was indeed a very inciting input. I have to say I learned a lot, even though I'm also trying to follow some of these processes. But thank you so much. Like a lot to think about, a lot to write down, and I'm sure our audience will have plenty of questions about this. We're now going to our second speaker. Oldag Caspar is someone who's been working on European and German climate policy for many years. He also has some experience of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And but my question to Oldag is somewhat similar question I had for Tatiana, but more with the regard to European and German climate agenda. So what has been happening in the climate agenda here in Germany, in the European Union, since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the full-scale war in 22, because of the war, but not only because of the war, right? What other important trends are out here?
Yeah, thank you, Angelina, for inviting me, and good to be here. Looking forward to the questions from the audience later on. So I have probably 5 minutes for this short question.
10 minutes is also fine. Yeah.
I'm making fun because actually there is a lot to report on. Yeah? So the EU, which has become over the last years, actually also during the war, the main driver of climate policy in the European Union. So having becoming much more important than the national governments actually, due to things that have been implemented also during the war, actually. So the EU has become more and more important. There's a lot to report, actually, on what happened on the Brussels level in terms of actually quite progressive, quite interesting, positive developments that many of us also probably worked a bit on. And actually, that's quite an impressive success of the climate neutrality transition that we can globally see already. So yes, I am looking at Brussels level. I'm a policy consultant, analyst, even you might say, but I'm an NGO guy, like Germanwatch is an environmental expert organization, you might say. So we are working with the Brussels level a lot and doing advocacy work there, but also with Berlin. On climate issues, but also on other issues. My topic is climate and the green transition in the energy transport field mainly, but also in heating systems and agriculture. So yes, and my main thesis probably today, and let me just sum that up in the beginning, maybe that's more interesting also for you, is that the war has not derailed at all climate politics or policies, neither in Brussels, not in Germany, and I would say probably not in any of the countries of the European Union. It has put stress, further new stress, on a stressful situation due to COVID that we already experienced, and Tatiana mentioned parts or most of these drivers. Yes, it has become more complicated to achieve the set climate goals until 2050, mainly in the European Union, becoming climate neutral. And 45 is the Germany goal now. It has become a little less likely that we will achieve that, but still it's quite likely we will achieve these goals. The question is the cost in terms of social equity, for instance, so energy prices as one of the big question marks here, but also jobs and industry and so on. So how do we manage this transition? And actually, yes, still there's a chance or a risk actually that this transition can be further slowed down over the next years. We now have the start of a new commission in Brussels, probably you have all seen that, and there will soon be a new government in Germany, hopefully at least. And there is a lot of question marks actually, also in France, by the way, also an important player in the European Union and globally on all this. Yeah, there's a lot of question marks actually how the new threat, security, military, and so on, will play out towards the climate agenda. But still, I think my argument holds that the stress test that we've seen, starting with COVID actually, but then being accelerated and maybe even multiplied with Putin's full-scale invasion into Ukraine, this nevertheless obviously means that we are more or less on track of doing what we we're meant to do, what we planned, what our politicians have been planning, and analysts and so on over the last years. I would probably continue with also actually adding to the drivers Tatiana already mentioned, and they double a bit what I also noted down, but maybe let me add a bit of this. There are, of course, positive drivers and negative drivers. The negative drivers that we now experience, that I would probably add to the equation, are everyone knows that, is energy prices are high, you mentioned that. This added a new inflation, which now is not actually on energy prices anymore, it's on everything else more or less, but also due to energy prices. It started before the war, but actually was accelerated a lot by the war. And this, of course, puts a lot of stress to state budgets and also budgets of companies for their investments. So there is a lot of actually regression now. We are struggling from that as an NGO. There is less state money, less also other foundation money available for doing good projects on continuing on accelerating the green transition. And this is also happening with investment endeavors in companies. And state money subsidies for working on the green industry transition, for instance. These budgets are under big stress now because of lower growth rates, because of high energy prices, and so on. So this is a very important negative driver. And there is a second negative driver. Actually, you also mentioned it, but I think it's important to reiterate. I should reiterate it and mention it again. It's the distraction of politicians and of media and others, because it's quite clear there are new urgent problems now in the world. 2019, 20, these were the years of Fridays for Future, of the climate agenda, becoming first cover issue in most media, even globally, not only here in Europe. So then the European elections in 2019 were the climate elections, actually. Then came COVID. Yes, climate became became less important for many people, but still it was second or third tier issue. And then in 2022, Putin added a couple of more problems, which is inflation and security and the threat of war. And that is, yes, now climate is approximately number 5 or 6 in what voters say when we as Germanwatch had a poll out a year ago that when we were asking people. The answer was very clear, actually. Climate is still, nevertheless, one of the top issues for voters in the European Union and in Germany, even in the European Union, not only here in this country, but it's not number 2 or number 1 anymore, of course, and politicians have to react to that. But I think the positive note here is that it will structurally not move much lower. So maybe 1-2 places lower over the next years, who never knows, but still it will not stop to be one of the major issues people are asking, are demanding from politics to solve. And the third driver I want to mention is that we have a problem on the international scene in terms of trust. Like, we have lower rates of global cooperation that is possible, that is potentially possible now, because trust rates are down due to this war additionally. I mean, not only, again, COVID started that probably with who gets the masks first, and the vaccines. But then now we have actually, a more or less divided world that we didn't have until 22, with some countries more or less supporting Russia and some countries more or less supporting Ukraine. And the West, you might say, probably sometimes, but still, this is a problem for the international climate negotiations. You, Angelina, have been to Baku, to the climate summit recently of the United Nations. I don't know, Tatiana, maybe you too, me not, but maybe you can tell us more about your experiences there in terms of the new conflict situation that, at least I heard, has been at least a bit of dominating this climate summit now. And if that continues, we will have huge problems in solving this climate problem globally. This is actually the problem where we need cooperation. More than maybe with any other problem globally, even nuclear weapons. And yes, and these are the three drivers I found most important. Maybe there are more, and happy to add, maybe you can add more of these, but still, nevertheless, and probably I should stop here now, not becoming too late, but you can go into details. There's a lot that happened on the EU level and also in Germany, and just mentioning probably two things that happened due to the war, not in spite of Putin's war, but due to Putin's war. On the EU level, there has been, like, just in May 22, 2 months after Putin started the war, the EU already agreed to the Repower EU plan. That is a direct answer to the war, and the targets were lowering energy demand, diversifying energy demand, to, of course, investing into the new energy system, for instance, into cross-border power grids. There was a new investment facility that 300 billion probably. Oh, okay, I have to look it up. It's here. But it was considerable. A new energy, not only energy policy, but mainly energy-driven facility for investments. And this worked, actually. So gas consumption in the EU during 1 year went down by 18%. The target was 15% for this plan, Repower EU. But so it was quite successful, and that, of course, was a driver for the energy transition, for the climate neutrality transition. It accelerated processes, and there were similar movements, probably even more here in Berlin, that took place at the same time. The newly elected then Traffic Lights Coalition here, with the Greens and power of the Climate and Economics Ministries, was actually energized by the new opportunities Putin laid in front of them. In terms of now, actually, it became finally clear that we have to stop using gas from Russia and oil from Russia. Now that means, and which is the energy that we have at home? Oh, yes, it is wind and solar. And even Christian Lindner, the head of the most unlikely pro-climate party in that coalition, which is now gone, probably about that story. And even Christian Lindner then called renewables freedom energies. That was a term coined then by Christian Lindner, by the liberal FDP party. And that, of course, was a push, and the Greens and the Ministry of Climate was was therefore I mean, they did a good job actually, but that gave a push to them in introducing new laws that pushed the renewable dissemination in Germany quite a lot actually, up. I'm not mistaken, 8%, which is so renewable consumption in the power mix, and the electricity was up from something like 45 to 52 percentages from 22 to 23. Now we are about, that's new numbers, 54% of the German electricity grid is fueled by solar and wind, mainly by renewables. So this is actually a new driver and acceleration that probably would not have been possible to that extent if not Putin had invaded Ukraine in 2002. And lastly, to mention here, what also was probably accelerated was the so-called heating law in Germany, which played out not that well as many wanted it to have. Yes, there was quite of a backlash in the making of the law because there were mistakes made, mistakes by the ministry and probably also by the Green Party who led the ministry. But it was also a problem with the German media system actually that bashed the law before the draft law was ready in a not very fair way, mentioning here the Bild Zeitung especially. But still, this law changes the situation in Germany fundamentally. It will, not that much as needed, but still it will, and it will encourage people building houses especially, but also renovating them to use heat pumps and not gas and oil installations anymore. Not to that extent that we hoped it to do, but still. And then, of course, yeah, there's a still row. I don't want to go into details because then it's really too long, but maybe if you have questions, I can. There's a whole series of laws that came into being on the Brussels level that will very likely, if they would not be backtracked now with the new Commission, at least, and it doesn't look like it, they will very much at least, then they will really change our way of doing business in the European Union and of how we live actually. And this is all under the roof of the so-called European Green Deal with the upscaled climate target for 2030. As part of the Green Deal, it was upscaled before the war actually, but then upscaled to minus 55% below the 1990 level in 2030. Up from minus 40%, 15% up. That's quite a number. It was not questioned after Putin invaded Ukraine. Quite the other way around. It actually encouraged decision makers in the European Union moving on this way to implementing that target. And now we even have a discussion on the 2040 target, which is very brand new, on a 90% target. That's the proposal of the European Commission, 90%, minus 90% in 2040. I don't see yet serious voices, at least in the European Union, despite all the election results in terms of right-wing parties, to scrap this 90% target or to not deciding upon it, because it's not decided yet. It's just a proposal by the Commission. But then also we see a lot of laws, including reforming the emissions trading system quite in an ambitious way. In terms of when you look at the industry transition, there is a new clean industry plan or deal that is being planned by the Commission. There will be quite a change over the next years how industries will make business in the European Union. And there's much on transport, probably things you have heard already also. And there is more in the European Union, which is really changing a lot, also even internationally. I'll stop here, and just last sentence is that if we think of the future, long term, if Putin wouldn't have invaded Ukraine in 2022, I think we would have been better off now, and we would have been better off in the future in terms of reaching Paris Agreement climate targets. Yes, probably, very likely. But still, we means millions of people actually have done such a good job over the last years that even Putin, with one of the most powerful armies in the world, could not derail the whole system. And probably will not derail it to a way that means like global temperatures will rise in a significantly at least higher rate than it is foreseen or that we can foresee. Yeah? So Putin is not ready to, the Russian army will not, very likely not put our climate, global climate, on a new scale of risk, on a new level of risk, I want to say. But still, yes, we have to be, and that's my very last sentence, we have to be careful because still a lot of black swans can swim across positive ones and negative ones. So.
Thank you so much, Oldag. I think you really managed to provide and to draw a very clear picture for us, what the major trends are, what's happening, what can probably appear in the future. And yeah, so from my side, great thank you to both of you. And now I would suggest we would open the floor. So please brave up. Oh, I see already quite a few hands. Do we have someone in the room with a microphone?
Thank you very much for your presentation, quite interesting for me. The question I want to ask is actually on the first presenter. I love the section when you are talking about how there's this sanction on Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. And to me, and from what you just presented, it's like the sanction is not actually having any impact at all to, both sides, especially to. So I'm now bringing this into global perception on the issue of energy, who is taking responsibility for the climate change, who will take responsibility for polluting the environment. The best way and the best modality that has been there for long is to put sanction. So if sanction is not actually workable and not really effective, so how can we now make people or country or group of people responsible for the impact on the environment? That's the way I just want to, thank you.
Thank you.
So that's a great question, and I would say even a philosophical question, because it's about the crime and punishment. Yeah? And it could be invasion, it could be violation of climate obligations, or whatever you choose, or human rights. I mean, yeah. There is already quite a lot of literature written about sanctions. I mean, academic research. And the key conclusion is that sanctions do never work as a punishment, at least as an immediate punishment, which forces the criminal to change his behavior. Yeah? What they are doing, it's a very slow instrument. Yeah? And actually, how it works, it is removing the future opportunities, yeah? The development path from the criminal. So take Iran, for example. Yeah, the sanctions are on it for 40 years more. Yeah, it's not collapsing. Yeah, it's still living, but it's not developing any longer. It was a very quickly growing economy, actually, before the sanctions were put on. It became like a frozen zone. Yeah, so similarly, I assume, and we start to see, I wouldn't say, that sanctions on Russia are not working at all. They are. Yeah, slowly, they are taking away margins. They are taking away R&D potential. Yeah, so, but it's not, they do not have an immediate effect. And going back to your philosophical part, Whether punishment works like an incentive, no, it doesn't. You can see it with your kids. Yeah, it's you need to have positive motivation. Yeah? If you want to really get different countries unified by some idea, they need to see positive effect for them in the longer term. And it's a really good question to thinking, like talking about COP29. Yeah, I think it was quite a disappointment for many participants, yeah, because basically the outcome wasn't inspiring at all. Now everybody is like hoping for the next COP that like there might be a major breakthrough. We do not know what will happen, especially what will be the position of the US, because in terms of financial capacity, it's like the major financial player. Yeah. But anyway, I assume this whole situation has been, it was a very illustrative case for many countries who were looking at Russia, looking at the US and thinking, so that's how the punishment looks like. Okay. Yeah, China has created a special working group to research how the sanctions on Russia were working and how Russia was adjusting, because they understand quite clearly with the Trump and with all these like tariffs under discussion, sanctions on China are quite likely if something goes wrong with Taiwan. Yeah? So it's now, remember I said about this fragmentation and deglobalization trend. Yeah? So sanctions are no longer viewed as, oh no, bless us from getting sanctions. That will be a catastrophe to something, well, okay, sanctions, it might be unpleasant, but it's we can survive it. It's okay to live under sanctions. There is life under sanctions like this way, which is quite dangerous.
It sounds like a completely new world.
Absolutely.
And it's just happening really as we speak, right? Like we live through it. It's crazy. We had a few hands here, right? Okay.
Hi, my name is Monika Bucher. I'm from the Kelso Institute in Berlin. Then Ms. Mitrova, my question would be with respect to the energy transition in Ukraine. Do you have any experience or knowledge on who is gonna invest there, who will be the energy companies, and also what kind of energy will be used there? I'm thinking a little bit of the shock doctrine of Naomi Klein, that like this is an opportunity for many companies to make money, kind of. So the goal, of course, would be to also include the citizens in this energy transition to make it just and also sustainable. And maybe even decentralized. This is also an ideological topic, like some saying centralized is the future because the transmission grids are better plannable, and others say decentralized. So if you have a stake on that, it would be interesting. And then, Mr. Caspar, my question to you would be, you were talking about the huge European changes and regulations, and that's true. I was thinking of the clean energy package that was introduced in 2019, so before the war, where the focus was also on renewable energy communities, so again, decentralized energy. And I noticed that the focus on decentralized energy is going away, like in the Renewable Energy Directive 3, there is mentioned that energy sharing should be a goal, but the states are not really transposing it well. So in Germany, for example, if you want to share energy with your neighbor, you have to act as a company, even if you're just an individual. So you have a lot of liabilities, and it's making energy sharing really difficult. So how do you see the energy future, given the pressure? I know politicians are probably focusing on the big companies who can produce a lot of energy, but do you think citizens will have a role in that as well? And the last question would be for both of you with respect to the merit order principle and the huge profits that actually renewable energy companies were doing, and what you think of excess profit tax.
Thank you. Well,
Okay, I'll start with the Ukrainian question. So I'm not engaged in the recovery plan development. My Ukrainian friends are, so I have some general understanding of how it looks like, but obviously it will depend directly on the way how the peace agreement or at least ceasefire agreement will be structured. And frankly, we do not know. I mean, President-elected Trump promises to settle the deal in 24 hours. Yeah, it looks like so far he doesn't have a detailed plan. So how actually it will look like, and yeah, what will be the territory of Ukraine? Yeah, that's an important question. There is huge uncertainty, and given this uncertainty, frankly, from the commercial side, I really doubt that any big energy or industrial companies would be ready to invest in Ukrainian energy sector if there are no really strong security guarantees for Ukraine. Yeah. So the key topic in negotiations will be territories and security guarantees. Yeah, so how they will bargain, I don't know. Theoretically, yeah, it could be a good market if security guarantees are there, yeah, and if there is a recovery financial package, yeah, some sort of Marshall Plan for Ukraine. What I can say for sure is that distributed energy anyway will be a very important part of this plan for a very simple reason. Right now, Ukraine is surviving thanks to distributed energy. It's not green energy, it's diesel generators. Yeah, but people have learned very clearly that when you have massive blackouts throughout the whole country, the only way how you can keep your mobile phone charged is your small solar panel on your balcony, yeah, or your own diesel generator in your backyard. So this perception, this understanding that actually whatever happens, most of Ukrainians will not feel 100% safe with such a neighbor. Yeah, I think that will fuel this drive towards distributed energy. And what is, I mean, it's a bad consequence, but it is opening some new opportunities. 90% of Ukrainian energy infrastructure is destroyed already because of this daily bombing. It means that in this country, the brand new energy network can be created once the money and technology come in. So it can be like a testing ground for all these great new technological solutions which are not yet implemented on such a scale. Yeah? So that's an opportunity, hopefully.
One thought to assist what you said last point is that my observation on Ukraine is that actually we are currently there, that the war means everyone is talking about distributed energy now, like power at least in Ukraine, and actually also heat. And yes, of course, I mean, for community energy sharing, the concepts that you mentioned, actually Ukraine could be one of the drivers in Europe in the future. Yes, funds are scarce for like private people. Maybe Ukraine will experience whatever low growth rates for years after the war, but still maybe the other way. It could be the other way around. There could be also a Wirtschaftswunder happening in Ukraine in the next years. Let's see. And then at least Ukraine can be one of the driving forces for this. So lots of people who never thought that rooftop solar could be a solution for Ukraine now believe the contrary in Ukraine. And same in terms of international investors and so on, of course. Actually, yeah, I mean, your other questions to me were similar in terms of distributed renewables and community renewable energy systems, energy sharing. I'm not an expert on this, I have to say, especially not on Germany. But I don't see a lot of movement here, at least on the Brussels level, and neither even in Germany, neither within the green dominated, no, not dominated, not dominated, but the green leadership of the climate ministry. I cannot say much about the reasons, unfortunately. Maybe you can tell us more about the reasons. But probably one of the reasons is that that we are in a hurry, actually, in terms of we heavily need investments and people who know how to do investments and have the capacity, cheap loans from banks and so on is mainly big companies, big businesses and banks. But nevertheless, yes, I think still it will play a role in the future in the European Union, in Germany, and maybe more even in new member states of the European Union where big companies are not there. I mean, it's not their business model. In some of these countries like Bulgaria, like Poland, for instance, like the boom of solar, rooftop solar in Poland is enormous currently over the last years. Now there's a lot of people, private house owners who are invested into solar and who love PV or solar heat. Yes, this is something every future Polish government will have to take account of, the right wing it is. So this is something maybe also, therefore, a country like Poland could be a driver in the future for this. And we will see the Polish presidency of the European Union starting from this January. And then last question of you was, how about an profit access tax? There were these talks and a bit of like a movement on this after the start of the war. I don't see any movement here currently. I see a little bit of backdoor discussions in expert circles and NGOs. Maybe not only at Germanwatch, I hope so. Probably not only. No, actually, I've seen more of this, but we are talking about that internally. Well, and I'm not sharing a secret here, that actually it would make sense to develop systems or options of how to tax oil companies. Because, and there are studies out there on this, due to Putin's war, all private oil companies globally have made billions, hundreds of billions of excess profit when oil prices went up, and they are still, they are now much lower now, but over these, like approximately, I don't know, you know better, probably 2 years or something, there was like only for private oil companies, something like 500 billion, if I'm not mistaken, that was the numbers. And yes, you can say that actually they got this money from consumers, actually from all of us, also in Bangladesh and countries like that. And actually, why don't you pay back at least part of this back to societies for fueling strained state budgets, for instance, and for doing good things for humanity. Yes, but that is probably a thing also where we that would be a tax for which we would need trust, global levels of trust, because one country cannot do that, and maybe not even a small number of countries. Maybe the European Union can do that. Unfortunately, not now. These days, I don't see it in the discussions in Brussels, actually, for the new work program, for instance, for the Commission. But still, I think there is room, actually. If you all would mention that in your talks, in your papers, whatever, well, we can push this a bit forward.
Thank you. We actually ran out of time already, but if we have a few further urgent questions. Oh yeah, I can see one hand, so maybe we'll take this as the final question and then we'll have a break.
Thank you very much for the interesting discussion. I unfortunately caught only the last, probably third, because I was a bit late, but I have a question nonetheless to everybody on stage. So, Oldag, you mentioned kind of the geopolitical fragmentation in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war, of different countries taking kind of different sides in some sense, and how does this play out, or what effect does that have on global climate action and global climate policy? Like, what are the, let's say, the biggest difficulties that you see in that context? And maybe also to Angelina, was that present at the COP, in your opinion, this divide, or was it more kind of a secondary issue?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, maybe it's like for all of us, yeah. If you want to start,
very quickly, the biggest topic currently debated in the climate negotiations, the UN climate summits, is climate finance. And there we speak about hundreds of billions of, and actually should be even trillions, of dollars or euros per year that should be transferred from global north to global south for that these countries can also reach climate targets, can change, can develop low carbon industries, zero carbon actually industries, for not being left behind in this race to the green paradise, whatever it is in the end, because then they will not have the paradise. Yeah? If they don't have the finance there, they need low credit funds, and so no like credits, loans that cost not more than our loans here, for instance. So yes, and therefore we need global trust. I mean, if one country puts money into the budget, into the bag, and the others do not, then we will not go forward with this. And yes, in Baku, as far as I know, this didn't really happen. So maybe you can add to this. So this is the biggest question currently, and yeah, if we will not see progress here, then global trust, global unity, global cooperation on the anti-climate question will be much more difficult in the future. That is for sure.
Tatiana?
Well, look, unfortunately, my professional focus is energy geopolitics, yeah, and I'm extremely pessimistic. There is no global trust already. I mean, it's lost. And there is global division. It's not like in Cold War when it was USSR versus the US. Now it's more complex. China became really global geopolitical player. There are very strong regional players like Saudi Arabia or Turkey, each with their own agenda. So it's multipolar world, but still it's a world of confrontation. Unfortunately, this confrontation is actually driving forward this deglobalization, this fragmentation of the markets. And we see already how international trade is becoming more and more problematic. And I assume next year we will hear a lot about that with the mutual tariffs. The probability of getting back to global trust anytime soon doesn't seem really high to me, unfortunately. That's the world that we have, with several major military conflicts ongoing. With the biggest military conflict in Eurasia during the last 80 years, with very bad military conflict in the Middle East, with potential big military conflict in Southeast Asia. Once again, unfortunately, there is quite high probability of that happening. And at the same time, the leaders of the OECD world, they are becoming, their voters actually are forcing them to become more and more focused on their internal affairs, on their own countries, on their own economies. So just imagine Trump allocating money for this financial fund to support energy transition, let's say in Africa. He will never be able to explain it to his domestic voters, America first. So it will be extremely difficult during the next, 5-10 years to really come to any inspiring solution. But at the same time, do we have an alternative? Do we have planet B? No. So I assume corporations, will have to play more important role in this finance. So there are other stakeholders, but I do not really have a lot of hopes related to the country governments in this picture. So I hope I'm wrong, but that's what I see.
Thank you, Tatiana. Also, maybe a very short comment from me. Well, I feel like especially the last COP in Baku, it really demonstrated like a huge conflict, huge divide between countries of the global north and the global south. I mean, if you want to see it in real action, you should actually, on the UNFCCC side, you should watch the final plenary, which lasted until like 4 a.m. in local time. And this is when you have all countries of the global south coming up and saying, look, this money is not enough. Also, this money is a lot in loans or investment or whatever. So we are being mistreated. You're not taking your responsibility. There was a lot of talk about responsibility and guilt at the negotiations. So, and then at the same plenary, you hear countries of the global north standing up and saying, but look, it's already beginning, we can work with this. And then they were also saying, but what about human rights? You're all trying to push away questions of human rights and gender away from climate texts. We don't want this. And so you actually really see, you know, a lot of lines of conflict currently happening. And then the second level is that many countries, which I think Tatiana has also mentioned, including Russia, China, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, well, sometimes they're called the G13 countries, right? If we take G20 and take away the 7 countries out of it, they're now to establish themselves as regional powers, but also many of them are now trying to instrumentalize the whole decolonization agenda. And we see this at the climate negotiation as never else, right? You have Russia coming up, Azerbaijan, China, all saying to the countries of the global south, we're with you, we represent your interests, we're with you together against the global north. And then also, you know, pumping money to particular groups and also getting loyalty back. So this is also happening, and this is also, I personally find it's a very sad trend. I personally find it's a very worrying trend happening. Then there's a whole question about, right, so who is making decisions and who's taking decisions? We'll talk about it in our next panel, which is actually coming in 15 minutes from here, but also a very interesting example from the recent COP. There were more than 1,700 representatives of companies, of fossil fuel companies at the COP, directly influencing the negotiations. Once again, it's not a process which appeared yesterday. It's been accumulating over the last years, but now it's as present as never. And it's not only present at the climate negotiations. 2 weeks after the climate negotiations in South Korea, there were negotiations about plastics and elimination of plastics. And there, once again, we had so many companies representing plastic sector. And once again, in many cases, they're also connected to oil sector, right? Because plastics is produced from oil. And they were also pushing hard against any strong commitments on eliminated plastics. So we see this, right? So this is once again changing. So there are numerous lines of conflicts. And it is like this. So there's like, how do we live? Like, what gives us optimism? What gives us, I don't know, maybe a very last phrase from all of you, just really one sentence. Okay, what can give us good news for in this, among this bleak picture which we drew on a gloomy afternoon in Berlin in December? Okay.
Do you have an answer? I mean, for me, it's only this consideration, okay, we are in a deep trouble, but is there any other alternative? Okay, if we just give up and say, it doesn't work, we cannot handle it, so what? I mean, I have 2 kids. I have no choice. I mean, I have to do something because otherwise the world I'm leaving to them, it is already a disaster, frankly. Yeah, looking at the geopolitics, it's just crazy. Yeah, but if it will be also like overwhelmed by the climate catastrophe, I will feel that I've completely failed as mother. So that's my like driver. What about you?
I was asked that question yesterday already. And I answered black swans. I mentioned them already today, but I mean actually positive ones. And normally, I mean, maybe they are normally. Should
Then
be.
they're not black, no?
No, my answer is they are positive. So a black swan is like, yeah, you see all the white. You see all the white swans coming across the lake from behind the tree, and you expect the next swan also to be white, of course. Yeah. So normally that's how we are made, like humans. We are like, our psychology works like that. We derive from like our future assessments from yesterday and what we're seeing now. And yes, currently things are dire, things are sad, things are really, really bad. But I mean, that's what I mentioned. No, I mean, we have built up a lot of positive stuff over the last decades and years. This will not being scrapped altogether. It's very hard to scrap all these institutions that have been built up. Not Trump will do that, not Putin, no one of that sort. Yes, nuclear war, you might mention the Ultima ratio, okay, but that is then, I mean, that kills it all. So we should not think about that too much. But we should prepare for, yeah, that's nothing we can prepare for actually, but we can prepare for the nice, the good, the surprisingly positive black swans that come across the corner. And there are these things happening. I mean, now we saw Syria. Yeah, no one was expecting that. Yes, we don't know if it's really a positive black swan or not. But still, it was a surprise, a big surprise. And one of the most evil dictators in the world is gone now to a city. Okay, let's not, you know what I mean. Yes, that could be another black swan. You never know. And then, yeah, I mean, like current black swan, for instance, is CBAM. Have you heard of CBAM? Mm-hmm. The Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. That is a carbon tax introduced by the EU. It's already decided upon. It will start in the next couple of years. And many countries globally are now debating carbon prices, an emissions trading system, for instance, or carbon taxes, because of the EU imposing this tax to their exports to the EU. And this can really change the system globally in many countries. And there is more of this. If we look to the past of these, of black swans, we will see more of that. We need to prepare for this. We need to be ready. If we are only depressed, we will not see them in time. Others will see them maybe first, and then they might kill them. But we need to hug them, yeah, and bring them to the shore and feed them. This is important. Yeah? And if we're depressed, we will not see them. We will not have the food ready for them.
Let me finish our discussion with the funny story I've just remembered when you actually told the story about this once. So 2.5 years ago, when I had to leave Russia and come and live in Germany, I think it was summer, I was coming back home very late, and after a party or something, and I was looking at the starry sky, and I saw, I think, 5 very particular lights in the sky, which were moving in a very unusual way. They didn't look like stars, they didn't look like a plane, they were moving and they were getting bigger. And then I was looking at it and I thought, okay, that's it, extraterrestrials coming. Pandemic, the war, extraterrestrials. So I came back home, I wrote to my Ukrainian neighbor and I said, let's drink. We don't know what's happening, let's have a drink. And then she's like, Angelina, let's be logical, what did they look like? And I kind of drew them, and then we Googled them, and it turned out to be, that was Starlink. That was Elon Musk's Starlink. We never know in which form it can come, but let's hope. Thank you so much. Thank you to our amazing speakers.